Then I'm going to give you a brief profile on each one of his 6 children. And then the final part here, the third part of my story, I'll tell you what life was kind of like in Boonville in the 30s and 40s when I was young. So I'll start here. John Westley McAbee was born in 1926 in Indiana.
18, Dad.
When he was about 15 years old, he and his father moved to Missouri, where they farmed for about 4 years, and it started the Mexican-American War. He enlisted for 1 year. During that time, John was sent to California with a small group of troopers. He was supposed to try and locate Major Fremont, but they never did get together, so he went on home. Then in late 1850, John and his brother Jerome crossed the Sierras to California to do a little mining. John mined for a few months, and then I think he went to Sacramento, bummed around probably a while, and then went back and mined a little more, and decided mining wasn't the thing for him, so he came home. And he married a woman named Martha, a girl, I guess, named Martha Jane Crow. And his first son was John Watson McAbee, born in 1851. And his wife died in 1852. So then John married Susan Weaver in 1852. She was from North Carolina. And I was wondering how she got to California, but it says, I read the history, it said that she moved to California with her mother, Lucinda, and her second husband, John Elkins. Moved to Missouri. And I got a little side story here to tell you about Susan's mother, Lucinda. Lucinda married in her old age to a third husband named Bill Elliott. Bill Elliott was a member of a small group that captured Sonoma and raised the Bear flag in 1856. For a souvenir, he kind of swiped the Vallejo's bung gibbet, which is like a big corkscrew for pulling the plug out of a wine barrel. And that gibbet's been in our family for a long time, kind of a treasured thing. One of our, I think my son here.
There it is.
My son here. Brian, walk around and show it to you.
Yeah, I'll pass it around. Yeah, it's belonged to Mario Vallejo, yeah.
Wow.
1846. Yeah, it actually was made in Spain. I looked it up on the internet. And it used to have a brush on the end, right here, very end. You can see the hole right there. The brush was used to dust off the plug out of the barrel, right? Before you got to put
In May of 1853, John and his family and stock crossed the plains in oxen-powered wagons and come to California. They had a little bit of Indian trouble and some Mormon trouble. Mormon trouble was the Mormons wanted to confiscate some of his sheep. On the way near Lake on the way near Mono Lake, George Nevada McAbee was born. And after he was born, crossing the Sierras is very difficult because they had to take a wagon apart in some places to get it through the rocks. They had a Spanish land grant in Two Rocks, Sonoma County. And they started farming and raising stock there. I didn't know where Two Rocks was, but found out it's down pretty close to the ocean. And Mark McAbee was born here in 1855. And my Aunt Del Rawls was born there in 1857 at Two Rocks. And then about early 1859, to seek a drier climate, because it's pretty wet there, they moved to what became Yorkville. And in Yorkville, they had Indian neighbors pretty close. I think there was an Indian village about a mile away from where they settled. Ed McAbee was born here in 1860. And John raised hogs to start with, and raised hogs for a couple of years, and he sold the hogs and bought dairy cows, and he ran a dairy for about 8 years. I was wondering what he did with all the milk, but I found he sold a lot of butter down in Petaluma, for one thing. After about 8 years, John McAbee sold the dairy, and he started raising horses and mules for the Army. After a number of years, he sold his claim, and during that time he had bought other claims or somehow acquired them. So in 1871 he sold all these claims and moved to Boonville. In Boonville, he bought almost the whole town. Boonville, he bought a store, a hotel, a saloon, blacksmith shop, and I think a stable there too. John donated the land where the Methodist church is now, and they built a church there. It doesn't look like it's getting much used right now, but that's what he bought. His boys, Mark and John McAbee, they had a racetrack right there in the new town. And also 3 girls were born here. McAbee girls were Mary Lee, Irma, and Minnie. My grandfather, Sam McAbee, was born here in Boonville in 1876. John died in 1899, and his wife Susan lived until 1925. So that's the first part. Second part here. Profile on Susan's 6 kids. John Watson McAbee was born in 1851 in Missouri. He married Charlotte York in Yorkville. John became a dentist, and he also had a ranch in Yorkville. He had 3 children. The oldest, Frank McAbee, became a barber, and he lived and worked in Cloverdale. Effie, his daughter, she was pretty free-minded. She spent much time visiting with the Indians, and she learned so much about Indians that she wrote a book about them. And the book was called Indian Summer, and I see they have it for sale here at the center here. George Nevada McAbee, second born, was the one born by Mono Lake on the way to California. He married Charlotte Harris. They had 4 daughters, and he lived and died in Cuba. That's just about all I know about George. Now I got the more interesting one here. Mark McAbee. Mark was born in 1855 at Two Rocks. He and his brother John had a racetrack. I'll tell you about the racetrack in Boonville, and they trained horses. John heard that up in Canada, the Indians had some fast horses, and he decided he'd like to go up there and see races with these horses, with the Indians. So John and recruited a friend, and they went up to British Columbia. And I guess he did some races, I don't know, but I know 2 years later, his friend moved back to Boonville, and 2 years later, Mark had a small herd of cattle, and he had married an Indian girl, Kathy Wilson. That was married her in 1898. They had 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls, most born near Savona, British Columbia. And
We got family.
I used to get a monthly McAbee newsletter from, I guess it must have been some kind of relation here, Carol McAbee Jones in Savona. She listed all the latest McAbee's births, marriages, deaths, and a few divorces. There's sure many Maccabees in and around Kamloops, Savona, and Ashcroft in British Columbia, southeast British Columbia. My aunt Delcina McAbee, better known as Del Rawls, was born in 1857 in Two Rocks also. And when the Maccabees moved to Boonville, she was still pretty young. So she went to school, public school, and then a couple of years for private school. Then her father sent her to teachers college in San Jose, but she caught typhoid fever and came home. And as far as I can find out, she never went back to college. But she learned how to work her mother's sewing machine. Her mother had the only sewing machine in that part of the country. And she made shirts and dresses, and her mother kind of adopted some orphan kids, and so she made clothes for them too. The hotel cook got drunk, and John fired her, and Dell took over the job of cooking at the hotel. She lived right also. Of course, back in those days, women only rode side saddle. But when she was about 25 years old, she won first place twice at the Ukiah County Fair in an event called Women's Horse Tournament. Robert Rawls had been trying for years to get her to marry him, and but she wasn't ready. But finally, at age 27, she decided she was ready to get married. So she told Robert, "I'll play you a game of cribbage, and if you win, I'll marry you." And, as the game progressed, she was ahead, and she was starting to get worried, you know. But finally, at the end of the game, he pegged out, and he won the game. And he said, "Did you really mean it?" And she said, "Yes." So they got married in 1885. They had 2 boys and 4 girls. The oldest Vernon was a World War vet. And one time I asked my grandmother, how did Vernon escape being hurt in the war? And well, she told me, whenever there's any shooting, he got behind a big rock. Anyway, it worked. He made it all right. Norred and Ed McAbee. He was born in 1860 in Yorkville. He married a lady called Mary Alice Donahue. Norred became a dentist, and he lived in Portland, Oregon. And they had 3 daughters. Ed's, although he was a dentist, all his life he had a flair for racehorses. And at one time he was a jockey in New York. And, he died in 1853. And the last, number 6, was Sam McAbee. He was born in 1876 in Boonville, and he married Maggie Clow. And that's the reason I've got so many Clow relations here in the valley. They had 3 children. My father, Glenn, born 1902, then Claire and Marguerite, 1908 and 1910. Sam had a sheep ranch, was up Rickard Road, not right up here in Boonville. Yeah, he had a store in Boonville that burnt in April 1913. He also had a hunting camp somewhere up in the Garcia River country where he seasonally packed in hunters. He died of pneumonia in 37. Well, takes care of that part. Now, my father Glenn was born in 1902. He married my mother, Arlene Lane, in 25. Glenn trained at Mare Island to be a machinist. I was talking to somebody who didn't know where Mare Island was, but it's down by Vallejo. It was a naval base. And he was hired by Cat Tower, and he worked for many years in the live oak garage. It was 6 days a week. I was born July of 1926 in the house of Dr. Levi J. Tabler in Boonville. That house is still standing. 3 days after my birth, my grandfather, John Main, was killed in a horse and wagon accident on the road to Point Arena. It was just a little ways up above what's now the airport road. Mother's sister and her 2 children were in the wagon with me, but they were thrown clear and not seriously hurt. My sister Berna was born in 1928 in Ukiah. We lived at first on Grandfather Sam's ranch in the foothills. And then about 1930, my father rented a house in Boonville from Vernon Presley for $11 a month. This house was directly across the road from the county maintenance yard. The house was heated only by the kitchen wood stove and the fireplace. There was no bathroom at first, just a pit toilet out back. And Dad kept a cow in a pasture that had a barn just to the south of us. I think that's about where Kay Hyatt built his house. My sister Marion was born in 1932 in the house of Louise Nichols at that time.
Yeah.
She served as a valley nurse when there was no doctor available. That county yard where we lived by was a fascinating place for a little boy like me because they had so much machinery to look at in there and stuff like that. And in the back of the building, there was a chest. And I went back there and opened the lid. You know, that box was full of sticks of dynamite. I went through all the 8 grades in Boonville. Mrs. Brazil taught the first 4 in the what we called the little room, and Mrs. Rawls, the principal, taught the higher grades in the big room. That school is now the senior center in Boonville. A lot of the school days, I was the only boy in my grade. All the boys were down in conflict for some reason, but there were some boys a little older than me who came in from Yorkville. And one particular, his name was Bill Presley. I had a fight with him just about every day. So the principal finally got tired of it, and she took another strap to us, both of us, in front of the whole school. And that kind of slowed us down on the fighting. Now, in that schoolhouse, I broke many windows playing, I wouldn't say many, but I broke a few windows in the school playing baseball, and I had to replace them myself. So I'd go down to the hardware store, and Mr. Farrell, the hardware man, would cut the glass for me and slap a piece of putty on a knife and paper, and I'd have to go put that window in. And I got pretty good at putting windows in, I'll tell you that. Well, since there wasn't many boys my age, I associated a lot with older people. Like Bob Batterson, the carpenter. He taught me how to sew a board without cutting my thumb. You know, and things like that. And there's a fellow named Port Lawson. I visited him. And Port showed me his garage. He had it set up with 4 little gin poles, lines running all around. And I found out later in life that Port was the inventor of what was called the Lawson Flyer. They used to drag logs, you know, to the landing. Port devised this logging method where all the logs were picked up and flown around and placed precisely on railroad cars. Cat Topwater, the Lightwood Garage, he taught me how to weld using the oxygen 7 torch. And there was a lady called Mother Cable. She liked me, and she ran a boarding house for single men. The kitchen and dining room were in the rear of the Boonville Lodge, and there were small cabins out back. She enjoyed movies in Ukiah, especially on dish night. I know some people don't know what dish night is like, but once a week after the movie people would pass out dishes. You might get, everybody went to the movie, got a dish, and you might get a plate, a saucer, or serving dish. But if you kept going back to the movies, you'll kept getting, soon enough you'll get a set.
Keep going. Yeah.
She had a brand new 37 Chevrolet, and my uncle Alan Main was, who boarded there, was her driver. And she often offered 11-year-old me to go with them to the movies. There was a Ukiah shoe store that had a thing called a fluoroscope. You could buy a new pair of shoes, put your foot in the shoe and put it in the machine, and you can see all your bones in your feet. The government decided that was unsafe, and I guess it was. They were all removed from the shoe stores. Okay, today's dentists have little handheld drills for working on your teeth, but back in those days, our dentist, Ukiah, I guess he had a state of the latest thing on the drills, but it was a complicated looking thing. His dental drill was a motor on the dental stand, and there was cables and pulleys on two different arms, hinged in here, and it was a complicated looking thing, and I guess that was state of the art, but that's what the dentist used in those days. But the dentist in our family, John Westley McAbee, he had a similar drill up there in Yorkville, except that this is before the days of electricity, so he had different kind of power. He had some pedals he had to pump when he was working that drill. So I can't imagine, somebody pedaling belts and drilling the teeth. Those old dentists had to do it. I was going to write a little more about music, but just about all I had here was I like to listen to good music, and the San Quentin prison had a pretty smooth band, and they broadcast music on KGO station. San Quentin prison bands, their theme song was "Time on My Hands." Now, next thing I got here is jobs. I picked prunes and hops at the June and Genosha ranches. Donald McIntosh had an unusual job. Howard June hired him to stay up all night and keep the fire burning in his hop kiln. I hauled hay for George Fair, and with Vernon Rawls, we dug potatoes. I drove a truck pulling Vernon with a plow, and we uncovered a lot of potatoes. That was not a bad job, but then when the war started, the shipyards needed piling, so I did get involved in peeling fir logs, and that wasn't really one of my more desirable jobs. That was work. For the war effort, there was a collection station in Boonville that collected, people brought in things like coffee cans full of bacon grease. I think bacon grease was probably used in the manufacture of explosives. But, they also wanted rubber, and that was in demand too. And they were paying 1 cent a pound for old tires, and so I knew where all the dumps were in town because I used to shoot bottles and cans down there with my .22. So I brought in a lot of tires, and I got 1 cent a pound for rubber. Jobs for girls was more limited. Some of them worked as housekeepers in the Vera River resorts, and some girls operated the telephone switchboard in Boonville. This was in the little building just south of the Light Oak Garage. When I was in high school, my folks bought my mother's siblings' share of the main homestead, which was 80 acres about 2 miles up the Point Arena Road. And we moved there. There was no electricity. And, we did our homework by a Latin lamp. And one of my jobs was mixing oil with the gasoline for my mother's engine on her washing machine. It was a good place to live. We had apple trees, garden, cow, chickens. My mother made mayonnaise and cottage cheese and darn socks. Darn socks. Anybody here ever darn a sock? Any of you have? Well, I think it's kind of a lost art. I cut a lot of wood and chopped the head off a chicken once in a while. And, there was some large mushrooms that grew in the hills around the place. I think it was called the Kokora. I know I've sold a few to the Italian restaurant in town, but they were large and delicious. After a number of years, folks sold that place and bought a place in Boonville. My little sister Sharon was a latecomer, born in Ukiah in 1955. She married Charles Hose, a jack of all trades. They had 2 sons and they moved to Arkansas. Sharon worked for the Forest Service, and when she retired, she volunteered at the visitor center, and she also teaches a cooking class. I missed a page here. My sister Berna. Berna's here. Yeah, that's my older sister. Berna married Gene Walker, and Gene at first worked for the county road department. Then he started his own dirt moving business, and he did quite well. And they have 5 children. 3 boys and 2 girls. Let's see, I know some of them are here tonight. There's 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Gene and I used to hunt together a lot and sure picked a lot of abalone. Marion, middle sister, sitting right here. Marion married Bert Crosby, and they had 2 daughters. I don't believe any of them. Oh, there's one, yeah, Doris is here. Yeah. Bert worked as a telephone installer, and when he retired, they bought a plot of ground on a small island in the San Juans, Washington. The island is called Decatur. And Bert developed a spring there, and they barged over a single wide and an automobile and enough lumber to build a garage. And they lived for quite a few years on that island. And one time my wife and I visited them for about a week, and it was a grand trip. Boy, they had a place that could get the crabs out, you know. They had afternoon crab feeds. But after a number of years, they sold out and moved to Lakeport when Bert died. Then Marion returned to Boonville. I'm cutting the story short here, but she returned to Boonville. Okay, my little sister Sharon, I read that about Boonville, Arkansas. I married a girl named Marilyn Hesseltine, a Cloverdale girl, in 1949. We have 2 children. Brenda born was 1950. Where's Brenda?
Right here.
Brenda's back there. And Brian was born in 51. He's back there too. I also have a great granddaughter here, and a granddaughter, Becky here, and are the children here? Yeah, 2 children, yeah, great grandchildren. By chance, Marilyn's grandfather was named Merrill Heseltine, and he was a Cloverdale barber. By even greater chance, it happened that Mel and Frank McAbee were partners, and together they ran a 2-man barber shop in Cloverdale. Well, folks, that's just about all I have, except I got a little story here I'll tell you. The last year, in the early days, Indians lived around Boonville. And I found a few arrowheads to prove it. One morning, I was sitting with my cousin Bobby in front of the fire, and I thought Bobby would like to see my arrowheads. You know, I had about only 4 or 5 arrowheads in a little wooden box, so I brought the arrowheads out for Bobby to look at. I came back a little later, and the box was empty. He says, "Bobby, where are our arrowheads?" And Bobby said, "I threw the widow walks into the fire." Well, I'm sure there must be some questions here.
I have a couple for you. Where did the McAbees immigrate from originally? Where did they come from? What country?
Originally?
Yes. Was
I
it,
only went back to my great-grandfather in Indiana.
okay, I just wondered if they, because I heard they came from Ireland or Scotland. Did they come from one of those countries? We don't know.
That's before my...
Before your time. Okay, the other thing is, you mentioned one of the boys was born near Mono Lake, and some of our ancestors came across with the Donner Party. Do you know anything about that?
Come up front here and...
You mentioned that one of the boys was born near Mono Lake,
Oh, yeah?
and I always heard that part of our family came across with the Donner Party.
No,
They didn't?
no.
Oh, okay.
No, they by themselves there.
Okay, all right, good, clear that up.
David,
I just wondered when you threw your Indian points in the fire, did you think about maybe breaking through the fire afterwards and trying to find them? Because they probably would have survived.
yeah, they might have, but I never did try really.
You didn't
so.
try, okay.
This 4 or 5 arrowheads, so later on, it was even a lot more than that.
Yeah, they're all over, yeah.
Well,
So Richard, how old were you and Berna and Marion when you moved from Mountain View Road into Boonville?
well, that's just about all I have to say here. Any other questions here?
Hard of hearing.
Joan?
I have a question. How
Yeah,
old were you when you moved from the Mountain View Road Ranch into Boonville?
When?
Yeah, how old were you, Grandpa?
That's when Sharon was born.
Oh, probably
Which time?
probably about 4 years old, something like that, 4 or 5. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was pretty young.
We moved back and forth a few times.
Huh?
I said we moved back and forth a few times when the road was too muddy for Dad to go to work, get up and down.
Yeah, the homestead up the Pointer Road in the wintertime was pretty tough getting in and out of it. The wet road.
Because you guys came down and went to school. You were in school and you walked down the hill, right?
Oh, I had to, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we walked to school.
Yeah. So they was,
2 miles about that, you know. Got used to it.
And you and Mom got in trouble for swimming in the water tower?
What about that now?
Huh?
Come here. Hey, John.
When we lived on the hill,
Yeah, when you lived up on Manchester Road, you and Mom got in trouble for swimming in the water tower.
Oh. Yeah, we did get in big trouble, yeah.
my cousin Bill Metzger was one too.
When Joan was little thing, she lived next door to me in Boonville. And she would come over in the morning and come in the back door, she'd point, jerky. She knew where I kept my jerky. She loved that jerky.
What about when you were a musician with some local musicians you played
Oh,
around?
God, yeah, that. We used to play with the 8-ball band, but that's a long story, you know.
Who else was in the band with you, Grandpa?
Emil Rossi, that's right. Ralph Tinker. Ralph played trumpet for a long time with the 8-ball band. And, later in years, Ralph let it be known that when he died, he'd like to be buried under the band room where he used to play music. He said that's where he had the best time of his life. We used to play music once a week, drink whiskey and play music, you know. So,
Hey Dick,
yes,
your cornet's on the wall at this Smithfield Mill.
yeah, we used to play in the band, and the cornet I used to play is hanging up in the museum. You must have something to say, Wes?
No, you
Come on.
don't.
We've been friends for long years, hunting and fishing together. Go
Well,
ahead.
Dick took me on a fishing trip one time. I was living down in Fireball in the San Joaquin Valley. He told me to come up and we'd go fishing. So I went up there and spent the weekend, and he took me in one of the awfulest canyons I've ever been in my life. The most beautiful trout stream I've ever been in my life. There were great big pools, and the trout was all about 10, 11 inches, you know. But you had to go up this steep canyon to get around and get to the next hole of water. Because you couldn't go up the stream, there was too much water and too many rocks. Well, after about 4 or 5 trips up that mountain and come down to fish, I got out of breath and I got so tired, and I thought, gee, I might die down here. This would be no place to get me out of here. Well, I'm going to tell you, before we got out of that canyon, I was afraid I wasn't going to die. We had a big mess of trout.
Yeah, we killed a few deer together too, you know.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, Dave, how you got anything to say, Dave?
Pardon?
You got anything you want to bring up here?
Well, the only thing that I was talking to you about earlier was that when you mentioned the book that Effie
Oh,
McAbee Hulbert wrote,
yeah.
there was a previous version called Rancheria.
We used to go on an honor flight to Washington D.C. with the veterans from World War II. We had a great time for a couple of days back in Washington D.C. Good memories.
You have a fantastic memory.
But
You have a fantastic memory, and your family is blessed to have you.
well, I've made it to 98 years old now, so.
Wow, wow.
Okay, Kathy,
Yes,
come on.
okay, I'm Marguerite Metzler, McAbee Metzler's daughter, and my sister here, Chris. But I remember my mom talking about hearing that when they crossed the plains to come this way, that stopped for a day, and the Mormons came up and they tried to convert the great-grandfather in being a Mormon to have multiple wives. And she always said that there was a clause when they built this church that there could be any religion held there but Mormons. And then our brother Jack also played in your band.
Yeah, he did, yeah. He played the wonderful trombone, your brother, yeah.
Yeah, he did.
But he lived a long distance, but he always traveled up here to help us if he could. Yeah. Played for a lot of dances here.
Well, I understand Marion brought him up here, didn't you?
Yeah, but you were called the Eight Balls.
Yeah.
I remember that actually Jack's kids, my nieces and nephews, asked me to tell them about my brother growing up because he died quite young. And so one of the things was I was telling them that he was in this band called the Eight Balls. And all my life, I assumed it meant pool balls. It didn't. It meant there were 4 boys in the band.
Hey, Dick, I have another question. You said that your dad was born in 1902.
Yeah, I guess so.
My dad was born in 1902, and he also worked at the Bear Island shipyards.
Oh, yeah.
I would like to hear a little bit more about your dad working in the shipyards. If you can remember.
He was an apprentice machinist. He never actually worked there, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's about all I got to say.
I'd like to mention one more thing. I stood here and watched Dick reading from his small printed handwritten letters in there. He's 96, 97 years old, and he don't wear glasses.
He still drives.
I didn't mention that besides about 2 girls of family plus more back here, I have some brand new neighbors living next door to me. That's Dominic and James. That's the 2 fellows living right here. They're my new neighbors.